think the live stream will give you the 30 seconds behind. So 30 seconds from now, you'll hear me say, I think it's 30 seconds behind. Okay, so testing out our system. And that should come on in right now. Well, while we're waiting, I'm going to pray, okay? Father, we ask your blessing on your work this evening and on our equipment so that things will work out and we get to go live. We ask that we will learn something from the story of Joseph and be able to apply it to our lives. Ask your presence with everybody who's here this evening, and also we consider those who did not come this evening. We hope that they will be able to watch this in live time or maybe posted later on. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Are you there?
Yep.
But it's still counting down to the sermon.
Okay.
And I can't hear you talking, and I have my phone turned up all the way.
Well, he can hear it.
That's all the way up.
Yeah, mine's all the way up too, and I can usually hear a lot.
Well, I've got it turned all the way up on here too, so I don't have a way to make it any louder. I think. I think everything is turned all the way up, so that's the best I can do. Alrighty. So we're looking at Joseph from the front end and the back end and working towards the center. This is a pattern in Joseph's story. You see that it begins and ends with hate. And there's the hate between brothers and Joseph, but does Joseph ever return it?
No.
Not that we ever see in any of the story. And at the end, they're very concerned about that hate, right?
Yes.
And so they're asking his forgiveness over and over again.
Begging.
And kind of saying, our dad told you to forgive us, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if hate is the right word there, but conflict begins and ends in conflict.
Well, you know the phrase, they were afraid that he was going to receive that he forgave showing him.
Mm-hmm. In that sense, he's a kind of a messianic prophecy because he foretells what Jesus will say. If your brother strikes you on one cheek, turn to him the other also. There's a lot of messianic things here in Joseph, which we see initiated here, and they will come out later in Jesus' life. The second part of the story is mourning. Jacob was mourning Joseph as he thought he was dead, and at the end, Joseph mourns Jacob. And we went back to the firstborn reversals. So we were talking about a very strange story about Judah and Tamar that is interjected in there right in the middle of the Joseph story. Doesn't seem to have anything to do with Joseph, does it?
Doesn't seem to, but...
But Tamar is one of the few women that is referred to in the genealogy of Jesus. So it's very important in the Messianic timeline. And then we look over at 47. Let me grab one of these Bibles here. 47 all the way through 49, verse 28. And we just started to look at that, but didn't really get into it. Towards the end of the chapter 47, it says that Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. The length of Jacob's life was 147 years. And then he knew that he must die, so he called Joseph to him. And here we have a strange reversal of firstborn. Who is Jacob's firstborn son?
Isn't it hamburger? Hamburger. One sandwich. Reuben.
The Reuben sandwich. The sandwiches weren't invented yet, Jeremy. Reuben is the firstborn, and the history of Israel stretches over a long period of time, so these cultural ways of doing things could have changed greatly in this period of time. But this is going back probably to about 1800 BC. And so 1800 years later, there will be another question come up regarding firstborn. What do you think would happen when a man dies in Israel and he has 2 or 3 sons? Or maybe 12 in this case.
The firstborn is supposed to take over.
Firstborn takes over?
Yeah. Supposed to, I said.
Yeah. So what does that mean by take over? He gets everything?
Oh, yeah.
I think he gets the biggest share, doesn't he?
Yeah, he gets a double share of the divisible part of the inheritance. So if the father leaves livestock and cash and things that are, pick up and portable kind of stuff, then the lion's share would go to the eldest brother. What about those things that are not divisible?
Not divisible.
Like what?
Well, a house, if you divide up a house, it loses all value, right? You just get a pile of rocks and rubble. So the house, the land, what about the family name? You can't divide the family name. The legacy of, father to son to son to son.
They show-
Genealogy is very important.
If they're boys, they all have the family name.
Well, they weren't,
Didn't have.
They don't have last
they didn't
names.
have last names back then.
Oh.
But it was very important to them to know whose son this person was.
So the eldest would be the son of, and the others would just be
Well,
Other sons.
other sons.
they're all the son of.
But they don't get the same prestige of being able to say, I am the son of. They just
Well,
have
he's
to
still the
say,
son of them, but the
My name is Jeff, son of Merle.
Merle Haggard?
No,
Things-
you are,
things that come along with that lineage are, in case of kings, it's the kingship. But if they're like in medieval Europe, the nobility, you can only pass that title along to one of the sons.
yeah.
And
So
so
we're talking about.
Europe was overloaded with second sons.
Just one?
And that's why, part of the reason why they had so many wars, back in the Middle Ages. If there is a prophecy, in this case, that Abraham would be the father of one who would come and save the world, right? Then that has to be handed down through the first sons. And so the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew is very particular about who is the son of who. But we know that a lot of those people had more than one son. Because Judah is in that genealogy, isn't he? So Reuben is the firstborn of Israel, and it would make sense that he would inherit a double portion of the divisible property and also the family legacy, the patriarch. So basically, when a father dies and he's got several sons, the oldest one should become the patriarch of the family. He gets the nicest room in the house, but he is expected to be the caretaker and the protector of his brothers now. So they will have an extended family in that house, and the house has tended to grow in size. Unless somebody's a prodigal and he just takes off for the high hills. In the case of Abraham, do you know what happened to all of his sons?
I only know of two of them.
Two? Well, he had a bunch more.
Abraham?
Yeah. Abraham had, the firstborn son was who?
Ishmael.
Ishmael. So he should have been the firstborn, and yet God said, "No, that one doesn't count. That's not the one I was looking for." God said,
And he died.
"Your son has to be the son of your wife,
Oh.
your lawfully wedded wife," right? God said, "Sarah's the one I meant, and you should have waited for Sarah." So Ishmael was the firstborn, but he didn't count. So what happened? He sent away. After Ishmael and Isaac are grown up, Isaac was about 40 years old. His mother died. Did Abraham marry again?
I
Sure.
don't remember.
I guess so, if there was a lot more sons.
Yeah.
Yep. You remember her name?
Sarah.
Keturah.
Sarah
Abraham
was the
married
first one to
Keturah.
die.
And he had a bunch more sons with her. And at the end of the story, what do you think happened to those sons?
They got sent.
It said Abraham sent them off to the east. Just go away so that you don't disrupt my son. But they were all his sons. Okay. So now we're talking his grandson, Jacob, aka Israel, and he's got 12 sons. Will he pick one son and say, "This is my firstborn, and I'm sending all the others away"?
I think he split them up into the 12 tribes. Didn't he?
Well, here he is dying, and in chapter 49,
Okay.
Genesis 49, first verse says, "Jacob called his sons and said, 'Gather together that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days.'" Remember Jacob and Esau quibbling over this blessing thing? And Esau was the firstborn, but he sold his birthright for a pot of soup. And in that manner, he despised his birthright. So God said, okay, if he despises it like that, it'll be Jacob then. So God considers that the birthright is now passing through Jacob. And Jacob now is going to have a bunch of sons. Jacob remembers very well what happened with his own brother. So does he want his sons quibbling over birthrights? He calls them all together and he gives all of them a blessing. Okay, so somebody start reading in Genesis 49, verse 3 down to 9.
Okey-dokey.
No, wait. Sorry. 12. 3 to 12.
Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the first fruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. Unstable as water, you shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it, he went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi are brothers, weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cool. I will divide them in Jacob and settle them in Israel. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as a lioness, who dares rouse him. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples, binding his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He has washed his garments in wine, and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk.
Okay, so he is giving a blessing to all of his sons. But the firstborn son, it's not kind of a blessing that you'd want, is it?
No.
Unstable as water, you shall not be the preeminent one, even though you are the firstborn.
Yeah.
He said, I gave you my might and the beginning of my strength. As the firstborn, he inherits that physically from his father. So Reuben and his tribe will be a strong tribe. But they cannot be the preeminent tribe because he, in the past, had defiled his father's bed. So,
You defiled it.
next one, Simeon and Levi. Okay? And he does not give them honor. Look in verse 6. My soul will not enter their council. My honor will not be united to their assembly. Why?
For they slew a man.
They're violent.
Mm-hmm.
And they lamed the oxen.
Didn't God say the same thing to David? He said, you will not be the one to build my temple, but your son will build it. Why? Because David was a man of blood. David killed many men. And so in his violence, David didn't lose the honor of being the king of Israel, but he did have taken away from him the honor of being able to build God's temple. So in this case, it passes from Reuben, and he says, Simeon and Levi, now you're too bloody. You're killers. I'm not going to let you be the kings.
David at least left Solomon an inheritance to do that.
Yeah. And then he comes to Judah, the fourth one. What does he give Judah?
He gives him the king or whatever the...
He will reign.
Yeah.
He will have the scepter, and he will be the lawgiver. Okay? Verse 10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet. Okay, that's his seed going down through the generations until what?
Shiloh.
What's Shiloh? Peace.
Isn't
Doesn't that mean peace?
Shalom.
Shalom, Shiloh. Also Salem, the last part of the city of Jerusalem. Salem.
Isn't that the name of the
That means
ranch
peace.
on Big Country or one of those old?
Well, Shiloh here is with a capital S. This is again a messianic prophecy. The lineage will pass through the line of Judah until it comes to the Messiah. And here he names him Shiloh.
I thought Salem wasn't very peaceful 300 years ago.
So, Jesus has many names, doesn't he? When he was actually physically born to Mary, the angel told her to name him Jesus. Why? Yeshua.
Joshua.
It's the same name as Joshua, yeah. It means Yahweh saves,
Salvation.
because he will save. He's also called Emmanuel, God with us. The Messiah, the anointed one, the promised one. Here,
The Lamb.
clearly Shiloh is what Jacob is calling Jesus. And he says he's going to come from Judah. Judah will be the king. But they don't have any kings here in 1800 BC, do they?
Not yet.
How long before they have a king?
Saul.
Saul? Around the 10th or 11th century BC? They got to wait another 800 years before this happens. But he's already talking about the scepter, with Judah. So, remember what he said at the beginning here? My sons, I will tell you what will befall you in the last days. So all of the 12 sons, all of these 12 tribes, are going to continue down until the last days of the world. So Jacob's prophecy here says that there will never cease to be a nation of Israel. And it will be made up of these 12 tribes. He's not going to pick one like Judah and say, all the rest of you got to get out of town. Sending you to the east. Not like his grandfather did. At this point, he's keeping them all together. We're not going to be just a family anymore. We're not just going to have father to son to son to son. We're going to become a mighty nation. So we keep all the brothers together. And when they have a bunch of sons, we keep all of them together. So he's breaking with the family tradition, isn't he? And he's starting a new legacy. He's going to fulfill the promise that was made to Abraham, that his descendants would be like the sand on the seashore, or the stars in the sky. From here on out, we keep all of our people together. But he does need to make one preeminent. Speaking of the Messiah, let's skip down to Luke chapter 12. We'll come back and look at the other sons here in a second. Luke chapter 12.
That's a lot of skipping.
Somebody want to read verse 13 to 21?
I'll read. The parable of the rich fool. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up for himself but is not rich towards God.
Huh. What do you think of that? You've heard that story before.
It reminds me of myself.
Hmm?
I'm in the
You got big
process-
barns?
Well, I'm in the process of buying a lot to build a house on, and there's an old garage on it, and I thought about tearing the old garage down and build a bigger garage so I could put more stuff in it. And I've been kind of obsessed with that, and then I read this, and it kind of hits the spot.
Mm-hmm. This guy in Luke 12 is not doing anything that we would consider bad, right? This is wise management of your resources, isn't it? If God gives you big crops, you need to take care of those, because that's what you put away for a rainy day. Didn't Solomon say a lot about that in Proverbs? Look to the ant, you sluggard. He works and stores up things and sets it aside for the lean times. Isn't this guy following Solomon's wisdom?
Well, right up until the point where he decides he's going to relax, eat, drink, and be merry.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just...
Well, that's him retiring. He's got everything he needs, so he needs to retire now.
Yeah, retirement.
To me,
I got big barns
that's what
full
it
of stuff.
sounds like.
You could look at this a couple of ways. That's wise stewardship. He's taking care of his stuff. But God calls him a fool. Is he a fool because he built a bigger barn?
No,
Is he a fool because he raised a lot of crops?
no.
Well, those aren't bad.
Sounds like he didn't give any of it to God so people could be helped with any of it. So he didn't tithe.
Yeah. Verse 21.
To store his crops.
This is the person who lays up treasure for himself,
On earth.
is not rich towards God. So we talked about the patriarch of the family, right? He gets control of his father's wealth, but it's not to make him happy and sit around at his ease and wear nice rich clothes while his brothers go and do all the work. He is given all the resources of the family to manage so that he can support and protect the family. Do you remember what Abraham did when his nephew Lot was taken captive by marauding kings?
Didn't they go get him back?
Yep, he
Chased him.
raised up an army and said that he had 300 trained soldiers in his household. He told them all to get their swords and we're going after Lot. So he had all of his resources, all of his wealth. It's there to expend in defense of the family. Do you think all 300 of those men came back alive?
No.
Probably not all of them.
No, so this is a risk and it's an expense. It's a hazard, but Abraham does this for the family. He is the patriarch now. So when a firstborn son gets the patriarchy of the family and the other brothers, take their respective places in the house, that's as much as a responsibility as it is a privilege. It's probably more of a responsibility. And here we have this man builds a big barn, stacks up all of his stuff in it, and then he says, take your ease. He wants to take his own ease.
But I don't feel very responsible.
So he didn't store up stuff for other people. He's storing up stuff for his own ease, isn't he? You can eat and drink and be merry. Now I got all my stuff and I can be happy. That's not what God says an inheritance is about. That's not what Him giving you a bunch of resources is about. It doesn't begin and end with you, okay?
I think it does if you're retiring. You gotta have stuff to take care of yourself.
Well, the word retirement is not in the Bible. That's a modern American term, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I'm planning on eating, drinking, and being merry when I'm retired. And taking my ease.
You're going to turn into a wild woman.
Take my ease.
Take your ease. Well, I think we're going to have to hold you back in this class until you get a little bit more of it. He says, so is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. Not only is he not rich towards God, but he's not rich towards others. So is this story a rebuke of rich people who hoard wealth?
Who hoard wealth, yes.
But it's also rebuking. I think it still has something to do with tithing. Because if you have stuff, you're supposed to be using it for God. You're supposed to tithe from your riches.
Yeah.
have to give the first.
Yeah, he said he was not rich towards God. The first sacrifice that we see in the Bible was started by Cain. It said he gave something to God. And then his younger brother Abel came along and it said he gave the firstborn. The firstborn of his flock. Cain gave something, Abel gave the firstborn. So Cain started the whole process and then Abel came along and did it better. And then Abel was accepted and Cain's sacrifice was not accepted. So that made him angry.
Well, that only happened once, didn't it?
Yep. Cain made sure that didn't happen again. Not going to have you copying off of me anymore.
Yeah.
I don't think the parable is a rebuke towards rich people. It could be a rebuke to poor people too. It just depends on our attitude towards the riches that we do have, to the $10 that we have in our pocket or the $100,000 we have in our pocket. It's the attitude.
Yeah, a treasure is not specified in an amount. For some people, treasure is one coin.
Yeah,
You know, the widow's mite that she hunted all over the place for.
yeah.
For other people, it's, talents. 10,000 talents. That's a treasure. When Bill Gates says treasure, he means something different than you or I do. But the good clue about why Lonnie is on track with that is because this parable, like many parables, is an answer to a question. If you want to know what he is really trying to dig out, first of all, you have to know what question was asked of him. And what was the question?
This that your soul is a part of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?
Yeah, way back in 13.
Or way back in 13?
Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. It's
Yeah.
not really a question.
No, it's 14.
No, this guy is pretty demanding. This guy came up and he said, "Teacher, I want you to do this for me." Didn't even say please, did he?
No,
But
he made me a judge or an arbitrator over you.
well, rabbis get a lot of influence and people ask them to settle things for them. But
But it says right there, seek, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions.
right. But the guy he's rebuking here is not a rich guy.
He's wanting him to tell his brothers to divide the inheritance equally.
If he is coming and asking for help getting his inheritance, that means he don't have nothing. Make sense? This guy's, their father died. He has a brother, obviously. The brother is probably the older one. The brother got a double portion, but in this case, it looks like the brother took the whole thing. I'm
Then
gonna take
why
the whole
does it say
pot.
right here, be on your guard against every form of greed? What if he's already got a whole bunch of money and he's greedy, so he wants the half of the inheritance too?
Or half of the second portion that the brother was given.
Right.
Well, did he say divide it more fairly with me, or did he just say divide it?
Divide the inheritance with them.
See,
Is it possible for both rich people and poor people to be greedy and covetous?
Oh, yes.
yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
it is.
So he's saying be on your guard against this kind of covetousness. And he's not rebuking the older brother who took it all. He's rebuking the younger one who wants it all.
Yeah.
It doesn't have nothing. So watch out for being greedy to get stuff for yourself and to just sit around at your ease.
Even after you retire.
If God has given you one more breath to take on this planet, that means He has one more thing for you to do. He wouldn't leave you here with no purpose.
He might want you to just
Take another
rest
breath.
and retire and take it easy. Because you work so hard.
Can you be a good example
So
even
it's
in
a
your retirement?
reward.
Lori's on a one track tonight.
Being a good example and giving somebody a good word is something that you can do even on your deathbed.
Sure. I agree.
Finally. Finally, I'm right about something.
Because when she's on her deathbed, she won't eat no more. Then she'll give it all away.
Mm.
And when you're on the beach retired, you can still be a good example to people.
What kind of example are you going to sit out there?
I'll be covered
Pick up your
tomato
margarita
before
glasses
eating
and throw them in the trash.
You're going to be hollering at people, wear your sunscreen.
It's not a good idea for me to retire on the beach.
So he is not addressing wealth or the accumulation of wealth. He is addressing the covetousness of wanting stuff that you don't have in your possession. If you don't have it in your possession, that means that God hasn't given it to you yet, right?
Do you think it's greedy and covetous to want to go on trips all the time and get away?
You've
Well-
lost it. You've lost the battle.
It can be.
I feel sorry for you when you get home.
If you want to do it all the time, it can be.
Not if you can afford it.
Okay, well, this little sidetrack into Luke just didn't help us at all, did it?
No.
All right. Well, I just
Go
kind
on
of
a
wanted to
trip
show
this
you that
weekend.
Jacob and Joseph had their issues with inheritance,
It's
but
just an hour trip.
Jesus also will have an issue with inheritance. He's going to have this question raised. So, Jacob didn't settle it once and for all by giving all 12 of his sons a blessing. These questions of inheritance keep going on down through the ages. It always comes back to haunt us, doesn't it? All right, back to Genesis 49.
Alright.
starting with 13.
Well, Scripture tells us that we're heirs with Christ.
Let's see, 13 down to 21.
Which sounds like an inheritance.
I'll go ahead.
Zebulun shall dwell at the seashore, and he shall be a haven for ships, and his flank shall be toward Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between the sheepfolds, when he saw that a resting place was good, and that the land was pleasant. He bowed his shoulder to bear burdens, and became a slave at forced labor.
See, that's what happens if you just want to go off on vacations all the time. He
Dan
becomes a slave of forced
shall-
labor.
Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a horned snake in the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that his rider falls backwards. For thy salvation I wait, O Lord. As for Gad, raiders shall raid him, but he shall raid at their heels. As for Asher, his food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal dainties.
James.
Naphtali is a doe let loose. He gives beautiful words.
He gives beautiful words. Huh. Interesting. And that's all that he says about Naphtali.
Yeah.
But now he comes down to the second to the last. This is his favorite one. The one that he gave the coat of many colors to, even when he was a young boy. Somebody read 22 to 26.
Joseph is a fruitful bow by a well, bough. His branches run over the wall. The archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him and hated him. But his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. And there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel.
There's the shepherd with capital S again.
Yeah. By the God of your father who will help you, and by the Almighty who will bless you, with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of your father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors, up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him who was separate from his brothers.
He was separated from his brothers because they sold him into slavery, didn't they?
Yep.
And the last one, somebody read verse 27.
Oh, was it Milton?
Sure.
See, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the spoil.
Yeah, Benjamin is the warlike tribe. They were famous for being left-handed people in the tribe of Benjamin. And they were also famous for being slingers.
Being what?
Slingers.
Singers?
Slinger.
Slinger.
Oh,
Slingshots.
oh.
Throwing rocks
That's
at
neat.
people. He's a ravenous wolf.
So, wait, David was a slinger.
Yeah. But David's from the tribe of Judah.
I should have known that.
We did. So, so there's your 12 tribes, and Joseph is included in there, right?
Yes.
But we don't ever say the tribe of Joseph, do we?
No.
Because he secretly gave another blessing, didn't he?
Yeah.
Back in chapter 48, he brought,
Jesus is descended from David, and Jesus is the line of the tribe of Judah.
in chapter 48, verse 12, Joseph brought his sons. Remember his son's name? Yeah. He bowed down with his face to the earth in front of his father. This is the secret blessing that's given to these two grandsons before he calls the sons together. So the other 11 won't know, probably, that this took place unless they read the book later, right? But that will be, this will be written in Moses' day. I don't know if these guys, they probably found out about it in their lifetimes. But the secret blessing was given before any of the other 11. So Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, guiding his hands knowingly, because Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has fed me all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, let my name be named upon them. Okay? They're not his sons, they're his grandsons. But he said, I want my name to be on these two boys. And the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. So he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head over to Manasseh's head. He said, you got it wrong. Your right hand should be on this guy. Left hand should be on that guy. And Joseph said to his father, not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Verse 19, but his father refused, and he said, I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, he also shall be great, but truly his younger brother shall be greater than he. And his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. So there will be a multitude of nations coming out of this one half tribe.
A half tribe.
Yep.
How do you make a half tribe? I mean, I know.
Joseph is the tribe.
Yeah.
He's one of the 12 brothers. So we consider that there are 12 tribes of Israel.
Yeah.
And the only way to make that happen is if Manasseh and Ephraim are included together as one of the tribes.
So there's really, in all actuality, 13 tribes.
Well, because Joseph was one of the 12. And he gave to the other, his two sons, half each.
Half each.
So
And where else did that happen? The 12 became 13?
Some of the disciples.
Yeah, Jesus' disciples, one of them was the son of perdition, right? So he went out and hanged himself. And then they all cast lots and said, we need to choose another one to be the next apostle. They chose one, but while they were choosing one, God chose one too, didn't he? Who did God choose to be the next apostle?
Paul.
Paul. He was called Saul.
Yeah.
So they ended up, the 12 lost one, and 2 came in, so now they got 13. 13 apostles in that day. It kind of goes parallel with the tribes of Israel, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, at the end times, the bride of Christ, depicted in the book of Revelation, will have 12 foundations and 12 gates. 12 for the tribes of Israel, 12 for the 12 apostles. Notwithstanding the confusion with 13. The city is depicted as 12 and 12. What do you think? Confusing
I
enough?
think God doesn't do that. This core stuff.
Fuzzy math?
Fuzzy math, yeah.
So here we have a reversal of the firstborn. We've seen it over and over again in these stories.
Mm-hmm.
The firstborn doesn't get the blessing. Ishmael didn't, Reuben didn't, the guy talking to Jesus didn't, or else the firstborn stole it. there's always this awkwardness with firstborns. And where does the word firstborn first appear in the Bible? Trivia question?
I don't remember.
In the
Well, I would-
sentence with Abel,
Yeah.
bringing the firstborn of his flock. That is the very first time in all the Bible that we see the word firstborn. So all of this relates back to that, and all of it relates forward to the coming of the Messiah, whom Jacob called Shiloh.
800 years early.
All right, so
And Jesus was actually his mother's firstborn.
we don't really have time to dive into the next section, but
It was celebration at the time.
Tell us what we'll be discussing in the next section.
the next section,
No. It's a surprise.
Slave.
I think I need to
Okay.
buy.
That's why you have it in a cover. Mine's like that too. I have duct tape on mine.
remember, Joseph is the one guy in Genesis that has the most written about him. Okay? Also, we see many things in the story of Joseph that are directing us towards the story of Jesus later on. Right? A lot of foreshadowings. A lot of the things that come up in Joseph's life will come up again before Jesus. Notice this. There is a conflict in this story. In the story of our Savior, what is the conflict?
He's dying for everyone's sin, but he never sinned.
Yeah, everyone else has sinned though. We are all estranged from God. We are all in conflict with God, and we can't fix it until the Messiah comes. Okay? How does the conflict get resolved?
Jesus died for us.
Yeah? And how do you accept that? There's a word, starts with an R.
Repentance.
Yep. Repentance.
Resolution.
The Beatitudes. Have you ever gone through the Beatitudes? I taught you guys that a couple of years ago, didn't I? Might have been before your time.
Before my time.
Yeah.
I'm older than you.
Okay, well, what are the first two Beatitudes?
Before your time with him teaching.
Yeah, I know. It was before my time.
Blessed are the what?
Or,
Shall that, for they shall inherit the earth.
Yeah, that's not the first one.
Blessed are the
Poor in spirit. Poor.
poor.
You acknowledge that you are incapable of fixing yourself before God. And blessed are those who
weep.
mourn.
Oh,
Yeah.
weep,
Mourn.
mourn. About the same.
You have to mourn because unless a grain of wheat dies, it remains alone, right? Something has to die in the process of salvation, and that has to be you dying to yourself.
Oh, the old man.
The other word for that is repentance. Okay? So, he's working back in this story here, the conflict between God and man, our repentance, and who fixes it? The firstborn, the promised one. And he comes for us, who are slaves to sin. So the story of Joseph is working backwards towards the forgiveness of the Messiah. Actually, it's working backwards and forwards at the same time. It's coming from both ends. And so
Which shall meet at the apex.
next week we're going to look at chapter 39
The penultimate?
and chapter 47. Both of them have something to do with slaves.
39 and 47
Yep.
in Genesis.
Yeah. Story of Joseph. Both of these have something to do with Joseph.
Okay.